Great. Thank you very much for having me today. Today we're going to spend the better part of the afternoon talking about BIM and project management and sort of mixing the two concepts. BIM, as we know, has been around, some say 30 years. Most of us know about 10 to 11 years. And the idea of managing those projects becomes very challenging when the teams grow large and the software gets more sophisticated. But I do want to express concepts that we're researching today here at Applied Software, actual projects that are working in delivering the value to clients, consultants, construction, and the owner. And so these are some of the topics that we'll be discussing today on the screen now. So I did want to give a little flashback in regards to what the industry has done over the past 10 years in regards to BIM, the idea around adoption, the idea of software increasing in value and ease of use, particularly in the idea of moving away from PC into the cloud and giving project managers better tools to leverage the project data to disseminate that information throughout their teams and the organizations that they work within. Also do want to talk about what I think is getting more increasingly important is the idea around BIM, not only for the project, but BIM within the larger team whole as it relates to the organization from the top down, bottom up ideas around principals, finance personnel within the firm, administrators, designers, and most importantly the project managers who are obligated to make sure that the project schedule, project budget, and the project value is upheld. And then lastly, start to wind down with some very good detail, I believe, in the idea of why a BIM execution plan ought to move from a BIM role in administrating the project to the project manager's hands and correlate that with the project schedule to ensure that deliverables are being achieved, whether or not an owner has described BIM for the client and for the project. So we'll go ahead and get started with this. Did want to express kind of a lot of where research comes from. A lot of these organizational groups that have gotten together to solidify the meaning behind BIM certainly span the gamut from institutions, government entities, and folks who are extremely interested as groups creating common languages, syntax, and protocol around what is BIM and how to define what that means when it relates to projects in terms of level of development and making sure that BIM data is useful not just for the internal team that's creating and authoring the data, but also those who ultimately will be recipients and benefactors of that information, whether it's a consultant or an owner. So I tend to look at the industry to help guide our team in executing some of this work. You know, one of the most profound groups that are putting great information and metrics together right now is the Smart Mark Report, authored by McGraw-Hill. Great data in there, researching the BIM use and adoption rates of architects, engineers, contractors, and owners, spanning all the way back to 2007. So it's interesting to see some of these growth patterns over the last 4 years, including the dip in financial investments around BIM technologies during the recession, and the phenomenon that has occurred up through 2014 in a massive adoption and re-embracing BIM technologies. The AIA, AGC, the BIM Forum have all looked at, researched, and promoted ideas or level of development, the guidelines around that, what it means to project teams, and the project information. I think one of the main case studies that we'll be looking today are what the CIC has done, a computer integrated construction documents authored through Penn State. I think that's a very good top-down approach to organizing around BIM, managing BIM, and delivering it through execution planning. Of course, IU came out of the gate 2008, 2009. A project here in Atlanta, Georgia, the Georgia Tech BIM Requirements. The GSA has obviously been around BIM for a very long time, and we'll certainly talk to some of that. But all these standards, I think, in the end, through our research, we realize are very similar, and that's the good news, is that there is a consensus around the idea of managed BIM and proactively managing these processes to ensure that we're making money, we're driving the projects, and we're optimizing the values through design, construction, and operations. So a little bit of background around myself. I started my first BIM project in 2002 while I was a project architect, project manager at HOK here in Atlanta. My primary role was to coordinate the disciplines around our BIM modeling practices for the science and technology group. So most of my projects were very large, extremely expensive, and if I were to put a term on the types of projects that they were high stakes. We're talking about $65 to $100 million projects. A lot of people are concerned about project schedule, project budget, and of course the scope. So, first coming online with BIM very early, it was obvious that this was going to be a game changer for the way that I looked at the way I put together projects, thought about teams, and the expertise behind the resources that I would put in place to execute. Simple things as space planning, the construction documents, and profoundly interested in what happened during CA in regard to my timeliness in answering and handling RFIs, submittals through this process, working with contractors that were already learning BIM. So from 2002 all the way through 2010, saw an incredible growth pattern. But as you can see here on the map, I think California right now is sort of leading the edge over on the west coast of the United States, perpetuated by healthcare projects. And trailing behind, I think, is the Midwest, and then us here in the South. So I think that these sort of maps are interesting to see how we are growing, not only in design use for BIM, but prefabrication, construction, and the idea that BIM could and is useful to our clients, referred to as owners, now taking information from these BIM processes. When we look at the growth of BIM adoption by type and size of firm, we can see through the colors, certainly rising on the purple bar charts for all disciplines and all stakeholders involved in most types of projects, primarily the architects, engineers, and contractors. And I think this is also an interesting slide to show that the scale of the types of firms, from small, mediums to large, have also shown patterns of growth and adoption, with the average at about 70% across the board for architects and contractors through, mainly small to medium firms, which are usually the firms that we are currently working with. The larger firms, more than likely, advanced with BIM very early, which is probably why their growth patterns are higher at about 91% there on the extreme right-hand side of the screen. When we all ask the question, why BIM, what are the benefits of BIM, I think the conclusive data through the surveys done by McGraw-Hill show that architects primarily are interested in reducing errors and omissions in their documents, primarily as they're starting to wrap up design development, construction documents. Certainly want to make sure that the drawings are tidy, plan sections and views are coordinated across the sheets, whether or not they're delivering 2D PDFs or actual BIM models to their clients. But I think that's an obvious area that software like Revit can certainly help reduce error and omissions and give a higher level of certainty to that as the projects go out, that things are more correct than they were ever before. I think in all cases, from architecture, construction, and engineering, marketing is obviously a key. So using a past project to advance or promote your skills and your expertise in an RFP is key, and we're seeing that across the charts. The ideas of offering these services are also, I think, common between both architects and engineers. Examples to that might be using BIM for sustainability and showing that material choice and optimizing space planning could certainly reduce the amount of energy used on a project is key, and I don't think accidental that commissioning agents now are starting to understand the key the connections between sustainability and commissioning and tying that together through new and exciting services. So we're seeing certainly a lot of pop-up happening with the use of BIM, reduce rework, and reduce cycle time. I think it would be certainly an area that could easily start to rise to the top one or two factors of why architects and engineers would consider BIM as a benefit. Reduce rework, I think, correlates with mistakes, redundancy, but as we start to lean the processes down in our project schedules, understand the capabilities of our teams, and their proficiency in BIM could certainly help bring items 3, 4, and 5 up to the top, if not correlating better. Since there is no actual there's not enough actual data to promote the idea of real return on investment, I think McGraw-Hill chose and elected to call the ROI a perceived notion, more of an emotional idea or a feeling that BIM is providing better value in the way we work internally. We are collaborating more. We're able to visualize, create 3D models, render, and share information faster than we have in the past. So the idea of perceived ROI BIM, I think, is okay. In my opinion, and based on these charts, I think it shows that those firms who are using BIM at a low level, meaning low engagement, are still finding negative or break-even results, and I think that's natural. I think we all understand that BIM is a game changer. It is different than drawing in 2D, but those firms who have been using BIM for a very long time, I think, are expressing extremely positive results in understanding their return on investment in each of the steps that they're taking in the design process. When we think about items that may improve the ROI, I think those areas in orange are the ones that I typically will focus on in a discussion like this, where I think, the idea of collaboration, data management, boosting morale, causing a new grassroots movement in digital technology, embracing new entrants into the field. Certainly that idea around HR and improving personal productivity is high with architects. With the contractors, I think it is pretty widespread across where they're seeing areas that will certainly improve their ROI. So fabrication, lowering the project cost, improved project process outcomes. Those are all, I think, natural things that are going to occur in a digital design environment. For contractors, I suspect that over the years 2014 through 2018, those same levels at a contractor will start to propagate upward into other areas, including engineering and architecture. In regards to the owners, I think that their ideas around what will improve their investments in software to consume information will certainly be, enhancing their ability in project management, in design and construction, to negotiate better contracts, understand what's happening in BIM as they're receiving data, to help lower their project costs. I think the most intriguing one to me here is better multi-party communication. So right now we have owners who are requesting BIM, but just know enough how to express what they want. But I think as we go through time, they will have more sophisticated software to see the visualizations that AEC is creating, understand and interrogate their data a little bit better to fully embrace the idea around COBie, OmniClass, and start to correlate that information into the facilities management systems. I think as we talk about improved project processes and outcomes from an owner's point of view, that is going to be a key driver, I think, for years to come as well. So altogether, I think that all 4 levels of stakeholder in this BIM idea have interests, and we all have expressed our ideas about what will improve our world internally in the organizations that we work within, but we all are unilaterally understanding what it will take to develop better relationships and communication around the collaborative processes that BIM certainly helps drive. So since 2007, I think we've been very focused on making BIM something that we do internal, helping our workforce work better, with the software, understand the software better through training, buying third-party applications to make the design processes better. From my standpoint, as a project architect PM, I understood what this meant and was able to talk around how to formulate space planning, for example, or a design iteration, or a wall section from a plan. It was very, very elemental stuff. But as we start to grow these ideas around our organization and help understand the ideas around budget, schedule, and cost, these are all conversations that could grow larger into a project manager's meeting. So when I'm asked, where's the project, I'd certainly like to know immediately how many issues I have outstanding, what is it going to take, what are the resources involved, how do we execute and deliver this value that we're talking about. And I tend to like this slide because it reminds me of my father, who was an architect working in Miami with Spillis, Candela and Partners. I was a kid and I would see this happening. And my dad walking around with a lot of draftsmen, and it was a very romantic office in the sense that the tradition around design is what I fell in love with. But over the years, I've realized this digital idea has just grown exponentially with the way we talk about design now, what we're able to do with our digital information. So we are now somewhat moving away from this photograph here that was actually taken at West Point a few years ago. But if you look closely, we're seeing the same things. We're seeing people working hard. We're seeing elevations, a lot of thinking, and everybody probably in this room has a very specific role. That probably won't change. The specific roles around hierarchy and duties that each person has to make to ultimately create a beautiful thing, a beautiful building. So when I look back, 10 years ago, this is what was happening in my BIM. We really didn't have an industry behind us. We were barely scratching the surface in anything, putting a lot of information into our BIM models, only to find out that this information was never found, let alone forgotten, and the expectations that we thought were going to be perceived and provided were never found because the software was not there to consume, to manage, or to validate what was happening in BIM as early as 2002. So when we think about the ideas around physical accuracy, IPD methodology, or at least the spirit of IPD methodologies, up to 75% of what the AIA guidelines documented in 2007. The idea of calculations between volumes of space as a variable in a formula to establish a load calculation. For example, the ideas around location of the facility model in the world, so that we can run sustainability analysis to understand and through geolocation what will happen to our facility if we just tweak an orientation by 2 degrees. The impact would be great. For example, on content creation, are what we downloading good manufactured content, or is it a 6-sided box with no data? Those items on the right-hand side are typically easy to get and to achieve. The items on the left is what we're finding to be the challenge today. Blending design information with construction data for actual installation information, clearances, zones, for example, the idea of as-built modeling and the record of information that an architect might be obligated to during construction administration. FM data richness, can this information, whether it be authored by architects, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineers, be useful for asset management? So these 8 items are typically what I, as a consultant, will use to guide an interrogation of a process in BIM modeling to ensure that, if we are at a low point scale, what will it take to increase this information? So by 2009, I think as Indiana University started to work with Autodesk and other professional industries across the United States and around the world, starting to develop matrices and discover that, these aren't just one set of people that are providing data. These are whole groups of consulting partners, contractors, and owners that are all contributing to help grow and mature this information. So we are seeing a departure from lonely BIM, meaning we are only doing BIM in our office because it's good, to let's do better design by embracing our partners and understanding that I may be authoring a part of the BIM information, but I certainly am codependent on my professional partners and consultants to bring this information to a higher maturity level. So we are now seeing, I think, a balance, these balanced diagrams between the left and the right sides in satisfying both design data and construction information together. And as we go through 2014 and beyond, and referencing back to the Smart Market Report, I think what was concluded there was a higher investment in 2014 for software technologies in 3 areas primarily: data management, mobile, cloud computing, 3D coordination, and hardware acceleration. So with those 4 points in mind, we are going to start to see an adoption from AEC, including the owner, and understanding better the meaning of BIM, the meaning of the team, the organizational approach, and the BIM execution planning process, meaning more, and obligating teams to pursue those endeavors, because the marketing teams are certainly selling it, and I think the expectation is going to go higher and higher as we go through. This just seems to me, as a BIM consultant, a normal and very positive growth pattern for the adoption of BIM. I did want to go through a couple of examples just to show how BIM, when managed well, can achieve some tremendous results. This was a project completed a few years ago, at least the design process a few years ago, where a team assembled together to help all together to design a building, and did sit together to develop a BIM execution plan process, which included planning, design, and the supporting professional consultants. Agreed that if we're going to do this right, we have to think about our roles on the project independently and together. We do have to develop a level of development for each BIM component and chart that out across a schedule, so that when we come together periodically, we fully understand who's doing what, when, and why, knowing that ultimately together we will bring the value of this BIM process to our mutual client, the owner. In this case, it was the University of Alabama. So during design, I think one of the most intriguing parts to us was that the team really wanted to do clash detection and coordination during design, and not wait until construction happens to let those results come in, so that we understood that there were issues happening in normal coordination around mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and architectural models. So the product that was delivered at each milestone was coordinated. I think that the teams who understood that they had to rise to a higher proficiency level certainly invested in software and training and understood how to manage these projects, let alone the team that was authoring the BIM. I think one of the most profound things to the University of Alabama was that the design team did put together good BIM, which enabled them to hire a BIM-enabled contractor to keep the process flowing, to be the benefactor of the operations and maintenance data that would come out of construction. So I just wanted to give an example of how this could happen if an entire team comes together in a managed state and starts to optimize their processes to deliver better value. So in regards to the BIM execution plan, the team did not have expectations to fulfill O&M from design, but they were obligated to fulfill good information for pre-construction, and they did that. Next example would be our neighbor here, Georgia Tech. Very similar, except that their BIM execution planning process was to come together and deliver O&M value to an owner for the whole team, including the contractor and all the sub-trades. Apply Software drafted the Georgia Tech BIM requirements a couple years ago, and the team at Georgia Tech found a pilot project that has been now designed and is currently at about 40% construction. The entire team at the very early stage of this project certainly took the end in mind. We knew what the owner wanted in terms of data. Therefore, working backwards and reverse engineering the whole system, I believe led the design team to ask very good questions. The project manager, took a large, long list and truncated it to those elements in the model that would be maintained by the operations and maintenance team for design and construction at Georgia Tech. So at that point, we then started to understand, okay, if we have these elements in the model that we're going to work hard to put in, then what attributes of that data do we need to schedule and manage so that we and our contractors can work efficiently, not over-model, and certainly keep these informations up to date so that by the time construction happened, that normal flow would occur and the contractor would take that data set and move into construction and start installing and validating and commissioning the building. So this is an ongoing process that is currently happening. But what we saw were coordinated models through design. At each milestone, the project manager did work with the team to make sure that the graphics in the model were accurate and that milestones were being met, the deliverables were handed over, and lastly, that the COBE spreadsheets were being delivered to the owner for verification and process review. The design team is prepared to work with the contractor during this project to hand over information which would then encourage them to work with their subs, the contractor with the subs out in the field and collect information. All of this information, all of these processes are certainly within a vein that is common. It is transferable. All the information has been scrubbed and will be reviewed to make this process effective and optimize the idea that this graphics information will be delivered to the owner for their facilities management. The key that I wanted to bring up here is that during construction administration, I think very early in the project before that phase happened, one thing was clear, that the architect and the project manager with that firm were certainly going to be capable and take the challenge of being the data custodian. And I thought this was great. Per the contract, there was a record model obligation, and that record model is being kept. It is being coordinated with the design, with the construction processes, but the information in that record model is what's going to be transferred to the O&M system. So I think there is a high value for new services for AE to build manifests, control information, keep it tidy, alongside the duty of being on board for construction administration. And I believe it is going to be the project managers and project architects who can help processes like these. So how do we do that? One idea that's being discussed now is taking a look at the organization. From here on out, when I say organization, I am talking about the whole team that's about to execute a project. So when we look at these steps that I've got on the screen, this is a gradual scale. So if you ask questions around certain topics, how is BIM being utilized in your firm today with a very specific BIM use case? Let's choose space planning. If BIM doesn't exist and it's non-existent, that's not going to happen. I think most firms that we're working with today are certainly in a managed state, meaning that there are managed processes. They've identified a BIM champion on the project. There's certainly a BIM manager within the firm who's looking out for innovative tools and software, and bringing that to the attention of management. All the right things are in place, but we're only going to be able to get to a quantitatively managed or optimized state if everybody in the organization has responsibilities and obligations and duties around BIM, including principals, project managers, designers, drafts personnel, and administrators. So what I'm actually saying here is that BIM will eventually start to propagate from a BIM management concept into a project delivery concept. And when that happens, the organization has to understand their role and their part in the game. And we're seeing that more and more. It's not happening fast, but when we start to, blend or blur the lines between principal, project manager, PA with functional roles and duties, regardless of firm size, IT starts to blend into all of their lives, particularly now that we've started to understand what the cloud means to us as we're sharing. So I think the goal, in a gap analysis might be, if you are at a managed state and you understand your future, which may be a quantitatively managed state, then what steps do we have to take in regards to personnel, software, etc., to get you there? So I wanted to show this example. I think as a project manager, my obligation was to constantly focus on the scope. Are we in scope? What's wrong? Are we working too hard? Are we late on deadlines? If the client wants to add another floor, what does that mean to my contract? Just a lot of stuff, let alone the idea of a schedule that's normally fixed and not something that you want to move milestones around too much. But then you got the budget. Is everything that we adding to the value of the project, do we take things out? Is there VE? How do I control all this? Well, that's one firm with a problem around scope, schedule, budget. And then not only do I have a problem in one of those three areas, but who has the problem? Is it the president, the VPs, the project manager, the project architect, a designer, an administrator that's helping out during submittal processes, for example? When we start to compound that across an entire team, what I'm proposing here is a unified concept around the organization, that we all understand our role on the project, what we're doing, how we're doing it, and who's doing what. Seems like it would get more complicated, right? But I think what the Penn State BIM implementation guide has done very well is start to break down ideas around developing a strategy to implement. So the 6 areas that we're talking about are our organizational strategy around BIM, whether we're planning for our company to implement BIM whole-wide, or whether we're planning for a single project. So what is a strategy? How are we using BIM? Are we using BIM for space planning? Are we using BIM for 3D fabrication? Are we using BIM for commissioning? Processes. How do we do it? How does our business process, which made our company great, respond to BIM today? How do we take our core fundamental ideas around what we do and what we believe in our innovation value, and start to weave that into how digital projects happen? In regards to information, what information is important to us internally as we develop metrics around our building types and our histories around these projects? What information is important to my consulting teams? What do I need to share to a mechanical engineer, plumbing engineer? And what does my owner want? So these are all areas that of questions that are being asked every day by people starting a BIM project. In regards to infrastructure within your organization, do we have the hardware? In regards to PCs, tablets, mobility, etc. Hardware acceleration and management from an IT standpoint. What does that look like? How do we project out as we grow our organizations? Do we use less hardware and more cloud-based computing? I can't answer that question here today, but those are all very important questions as we start to weave a BIM implementation together. And then lastly, and more importantly, is the personnel. Those folks in the organization that will create, innovate around BIM processes. So those 6 areas are certainly measurable in regards to the proficiency. What we do see today are, organizations coming together and creating a vision, developing a mission, and having goals around why they're doing BIM and what that means to the firm. From management support, I do want to push a little bit on that idea that, if we're implying here that project managers now have better ways to interact with BIM without using Revit, then I think we're going to be talking about project managers' ability to report up to finance, to report up to executive level for, up, and also down. How can I see how my project is working? Can I understand today how many issues we have outstanding before a meeting that's going to occur in 3 days? And if something's wrong, how can I enable resources to help correct these problems so I can come to a meeting with a report about my project and be more educated about the state of my BIM because I am obligated to the scope, schedule, and budget. And I would like to have a little bit more authority in the meeting about where my BIM model is so I can talk about it and certainly get things done. Does that BIM champion who's been assigned in the organization understand processes in regards to the business, let alone the complexities around IT and implementing software technologies and hardware in the office? This BIM champion, certainly someone who's looking out into the world and understanding what's happening with the industry and the ebbs and flows of how quickly computer software changes and keeping in step with the way that modern design is happening right now. And does the firm have a BIM planning committee? Do we have a group that comes together on a regular basis to understand and discuss the impact of technology, not only in the office right now, but what it means to onboarding and people that are coming off and out of colleges and universities entering our workspace? How can we help that component and elevate them to a point of new leadership in the firm over time? So those are very important areas that are certainly measurable, and at the lower right-hand corner is just showing another way to view a gap analysis between here's where we are today and how do we then align with our modern vision of where we think our firm is going, whether that's driven by the market, whether that's driven by marketing, or just wanting to be on the leading edge. So over time, we have here at Applied Software tried to simplify this very complex idea around BIM, which I thought in 2002 to be quite simple. But I think as our teams have gotten larger, the expectations have gotten greater, and our consumer end on the owner side is certainly asking us to deliver information. I've broken this diagram up into 4 parts. Business process, what is that, who's leading it, and how does it affect the types of information that we draw every day, whether it's graphics or whether it's attributable information within a model component. On the project manager side, how do we enable a project manager to certainly understand what's happening on the project? And then from the team that's producing, what is that BIM and project information? So just to recap what we talked about before, if I were to assess myself right now as a project manager, what is my state? If my state is being contrasted with a new business process for a projection over the next 5 years on how my company is going to grow, how do I align with that? And once I've cast that, then let's certainly advance and let's start to make moves to connect the business to the information, make it cohesive to a project management style, and of course understand how the projects are going to be made. So I mentioned earlier an idea of BIM uses, and I think this is key as a project manager. What I'd like to know is what is the purpose of what my team is about to do. And if I, as a project manager, have a role in that, whether I'm drawing in BIM or managing the BIM process, I do need to sit down and consider what's about to happen and why. So here's a very long list of just normal things that very well could come out of a process, but these more than likely will be used by a partner, a colleague, a consultant, a contractor, or an owner. So let's take space management and tracking, for example. It seems to be very popular right now. But in regards to managing a process, we know that spaces are made of room objects. They exist in every file, and those room objects will certainly have information. Well, let's map it. Let's find out who is the best, most proficient personnel to produce that BIM model, and then of course map strategies to make sure that information falls into the right hands. I think some other areas that would be popular would be programming, site analysis, design authoring. Analysis is around structural engineering, for example. These are all things that have to be considered and scrutinized, put on schedules, and understood. And we'll go through some slides here in the next couple of minutes to show how to think about the planning procedure and incorporate project management on top. So in regards to processes, I do want to make a distinction between a project process, which is what will happen on my specific project, which is extremely unique based on its use, my owner, my market type. That's for the project. From the organizational side, how is the team going to execute? So I just wanted to make that distinctive split between the two ideas that I think we do have to understand our project in its very nature, but also understand how we're going to make it and what is our organization going to look like, and how are we going to sit down and collaborate and develop inventories around space and equipment, define area calculations, and coordinate, develop shop drawings, whether we're creating record models or as-builts, create points in our models to help a contractor understand how to digitally lay out product onto a concrete slab, for example. Then, of course, construction operations mobility, which may include site observation and the handover. So these are all things that are going to be produced by a team. It will become information, but certainly needs to be managed. And what does that look like? It's really a question. When we start to look at the information, one of the things that we've done with our clients is start the model element breakdown. Sometimes we call that a BIM component checklist. So, how do we have a conversation around the information we're about to put into a use? So we can take OmniClass Table 23, for example, which is about 6,800 rows of potential building products that might enter a building. And a simple conversation could help wind that list down to, let's say, 50 elements. And within those 50 elements, as they become to be broken down, what are the attributes behind that? And once we figure this out, then let's start planning for personnel who will be responsible for that element. What information in the element is an architect responsible for, an engineer, a contractor, a commissioning agent, and an owner. In regards to level of development, I think by now we understand that there are about 5 levels, 100 through 500. These levels are not to be considered or tied to design phases. but they do serve a specific purpose, and we'll go into some detail about that in a little bit. But what does that mean to my project? How do I plan for the LOD at design development? What should it be? How do we define it for this specific project? And how do we get the people around it? In regards to facilitate the data, that's certainly going to be an outcome of the information. And how do I, as a project manager, understand what's in my BIM model so that I can deliver that to my clients? In regards to infrastructure and planning for that, I think, from a project manager's perspective, software I think is key to all of us. What is it? How do I use it? How do I engage? And how do I participate in the BIM process with that tool? And then what does my team need to get this project done? In regards to hardware, I think that's a more difficult question to answer. Teams are changing, mobility is increasing, and that's a very great topic to help to understand around, what do I need to manage my information, to coordinate it. The third section, I think, is becoming more critical because, if our digital design process is changing, that would say that our physical environment is changing as well. So what do our design rooms look like? Is it the room, with cubicles? Probably not. Is it a more open environment to promote better collaboration? Do we have projection screens? Do we have Apple TVs for people to share their iPad information onto a screen and visually describe what they're talking about to their team, just to be more effective and more modern about what this looks like? So I think those three areas in regards to infrastructure are key to understand to help the projects. In regards to personnel, certainly defining roles and responsibilities and understanding that from a project manager's point of view is going to be critical. What is the role, for each of my team members, and within that role, what are the responsibilities on the project or within the organization? In regards to the hierarchy of the organization, I think that's going to be key as we start to blur the lines between who's creating BIM and who's a benefactor of BIM to sustain the business. So I think from a top-down standpoint, that's going to become more important. I think education, training, working with consultants, keeping the team sharp and up to date with software and technology is going to be key as well. And then lastly, change readiness. Change readiness, I'm implying here, is a part of change management. As we begin to adopt new technologies, our firms are changing. The last firm I worked with was unlike the firm I worked with in my father's office when I was 14. Just radically different culture. The look and feel of the places are completely different. And I suspect as we grow through the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see more of a change. I don't know what that is, but I think from a cultural standpoint, we have to be ready to accept the change, flow with it, and embrace the technologies that are out there today. So when we look at the diagram and start to put roles on top, from a business process, as a project manager, how can I report information to my executive committee? In a project manager's meeting, can I talk confidently about financing of the project and where we are with the budget? Can I communicate effectively to an operations director about how the project's health is happening and inform them on what I need or what I don't need in regards to how I'm going to report? I think from an information standpoint, certainly design technology leadership will become more and more important. Information technology teams and BIM managers certainly have a role in sustaining the information that are on servers, that are in the cloud, that need to be disseminated across the organizations in regards to BIM content, templates, new protocol, exhibits to help guide those who are producing BIM and project information, such as administrators, project architects, technology managers, the team, and the consultants. So I think that the core of this entire thing is the information, and how do we tap into it. I think we're seeing more and more here in the Southeast, and from what we're seeing across the United States, RFQs that are now asking teams to market their BIM proficiency, particularly in 4 areas. What is your BIM execution plan style? What model are you using? Send examples of your last BIM execution plan. I think owners and organizations that are going to be consumers of BIM certainly want to have proof or some sort of exhibits that show this as a qualification. In regard to collaboration experience, I think that's fundamentally an interest as well. How well do you work with others? And I think from that standpoint, most of us probably work very well with our colleagues, but I would dig a little deeper to think that what they're actually asking is, how are you unified in the way that you talk in a language around data? How are you sharing? Do your softwares talk to one another? Are your infrastructures capable of sharing massive amounts of information across project teams to ensure that quality is being maintained? In regards to BIM tools, what's the preference? How does it work? How are you sharing? And within that idea, what are you able to produce with those tools? And of course, that would fall into technical capabilities across the organization. In regards to the response, certainly these 5 sections in regard to price of a project, the additional BIM uses that might be of value to an owner would be key. Qualifications around the project team. How do you collaborate? Is there a procedure? How do you sit down? How many times are we expected to meet around issue management, collaborative planning, milestone deliverables, etc.? So I just want to reiterate something that just constantly comes to the back of my mind, or the scope, the schedule, and the budget. I think that's the key PM 101 concept that I always consider when I'm executing consulting on BIM projects, is how can we leverage software that exists today, mend important concepts together to help at least get the BIM graphics and the BIM data out of a modeling process to understand this information, so I can talk about it more intelligently, so I can share it, and so that I can help my team understand how to get there as a leader. Let me start to ask some of these questions. Why should the project team develop a BIM execution plan? Well, I think that the reason you do that is to have an authoritative document that is a living document that is co-joined with my project schedule, so that I know that every task that I'm about to deliver has a name and a responsibility. I also know what information is expected within that data set, what process it's going through, and who's on first. I think those are key things that I would want to do as a project manager, so that my BIM manager is a part of this, my design team knows that I know, that I'm aware, so that when I engage, when I participate, that I can look at the BIM process and understand where we are in time, where we are on the schedule, and just have more confidence and more authority about my project. What information is included in the BIM project execution plan? We can certainly talk about that. We're going to be talking about that here in a little bit. I'll get into more detail. In regards to who should develop the BIM execution plan, I think it's a project manager. I really think that a project manager ought to control the teaming environment, the collaborative procedure, certainly understand the contract, and start to map out how we're going to deliver this thing. I think there are a few ways to begin a planning process, and I'll show you examples of what I've done in the past. Of course, setting meetings, setting milestones, important parts of the BIM execution plan process too. And then, of course, electing the standards that we're going to be using are certainly referenced in, or should be referenced in every plan, whether it's the National BIM Standard or other industry organizations like OmniClass that would become referenceable material to help that planning process. So I think identifying BIM goals is key. Designing the BIM project execution planning process. Developing information exchanges, meaning that I've created something. It's going to be in an interoperable state and it will be shared with someone else. And certainly mapping that out is going to be important. And then, of course, what hardware do I need? What's my infrastructure look like to implement? Because in the end, after that mapping process has occurred, the team will sit down and we will mutually carve out our execution plan and certainly map that towards our scope, schedule, and budget. So here's typically how we like to take a look and run through this. Begin with the end in mind. The end in mind does not have to mean that I'm going to be doing BIM for operations and maintenance. It could be BIM for pre-construction. It could be BIM for commissioning. But there is an objective. Let's just keep that in mind. And what are the information exchanges around it? So with OmniClass Table 23, I think this has been probably one of the most foundational tools for us is to understand what CSI has done, how a master format is evolving. The CSI working group has certainly done a tremendous amount of research to classify just about the entire built environment. So when we look at products that we're specifying, let's choose air handler or an air terminal unit. For example, it does have a code on the left-hand side. Great news here is that that code is also in your BIM user's attribute data. So there is a mapping process here when we can scope out some BIM elements. You can check them off, develop a list of objects that will become part of the way we develop our LOD. So we can choose to use the AIA planning documents, the AGC planning documents. They're very similar, but certainly start to assign the model component author. So with respect to that air terminal unit, an engineer might select based on performance. May have 3 candidates of manufacturer and start to put that into the BIM model. In regards to the information for that product that was selected, the contractor certainly has an obligation to add more data to that. It may be installation date. It may be the actual procured product, serial number, asset ID, installation data, commissioning information. But that stuff will happen. Hard to say who those team members were or are per project, but that all has to be decided in a BIM planning process so that at the end of a milestone phase or at the end of a project, information could be pulled from the Revit models and sent over to the next party, whether it's the actual owner or a consulting partner. But those steps are pretty uniform and work very well in starting to map out components for the project. And then, of course, who's doing what? We talked about that earlier, but there is going to be players, key players in this. In blue, this could be the architect who is responsible for some basic design data regarding the facility, floors within the facility, spaces, etc., including the components. Green may be an engineer or a contractor. So yellow may be a commissioning agent and orange may be an owner. But in the end, there are going to be instances where up to 3 to 4 or 5 people may be sharing and contributing to information across one data set. So where we have overlap,
that is describing the level of development, the model component author, a role and responsibility for a very specific BIM use. So for that component, the air handler or the air terminal unit, certainly up to 3 people are certainly going to be touching that information in COBie, the framework that has been developed by Bill East, the Construction Operations Building Information Exchange, is the most common vehicle to transfer data from a BIM process into another process. And there are several third-party software applications that certainly do help transfer that information back and forth from either the teams within the offices and across the web. This is a sketch of a project that I'd worked on, starting just to mind map, what this looks like. If we're all sharing core data in green, and I have an early design stage submittal, construction documents, quality control, knowing that ultimately my work was going to be contracted and built, there is common data, commonalities between all of our teams. And what is that? Who do I need in regards to resources? What are my standards that I'm doing, that I'm putting in place? This might be a first step, a sketch of how this is going to work. As we go through, things start to solidify, and in this case, we transferred our logic into understanding COBie as an information exchange. What, from an architectural standpoint, an engineering standpoint, and a construction standpoint, was going to be common between our parties. And with that, what business intelligence are we going to be taking from that to escalate our project and optimize our process? What was I obligated to input, etc.? So these are all, again, just sketches, but when we start to really map that out, the Georgia Tech BIM requirement does have examples in the BIM requirement for each phase of steps that each team member would take, including the deliverables needed. But these tools are truly intended for management within each respective organization to sit down and understand what information are we going to be taking and producing, what does our process look like, and what is that information exchange. And we can certainly get more detailed as we go. All of the maps that I'm showing you and the workflow maps I'm showing with you are widely distributed around the web. So I'm not implying that these could be created ad hoc, but most of this information is ready as template. So we think about design authoring. Who's the responsible party, architect, what are we exchanging, what's the expected output, who's getting it, and what are the next processes that these will be pushed into in regards to the data, whether it be design coordination or energy modeling. In many cases, finding the common data from a BIM process could certainly propel BIM use and help the outcome. But certainly understanding that from a project management standpoint is going to help drive the project and help guide and lead the design teams that are producing the information. I think this is more just to create and then stay aware as the projects just keep going. So as we go through, we think about organizing a project plan, and what does that mean to me? Certainly the project information, key project contacts, those who are contributing to the process, including the recipients who would want to be copied and made abreast of changes on the project, the BIM goals, BIM uses, key collaboration procedures, quality control, technology, model structure, project deliverables, delivery strategy, and contracts. So I think as we start to define a BIM process, these are probably the most likely topics that seem to continually come up on projects that are executing BIM and have obligations for design teams to manage a BIM process through BIM execution planning. These are common. But when we talk about mapping and including everything that we've talked about into a process map or a schedule, I think that's also going to be key, because as a project manager, I would want to know if an upcoming milestone has a demand on it or a constraint around a BIM process or a BIM deliverable, or something that I need from someone else in regarding leaning my process down. So certainly meeting the structure for developing a BIM project execution plan would be a key driver. Planning the meeting schedule and monitoring progress of BIM against the BIM execution plan. So I'd want to certainly understand specific tasks. What are my resources assigned to those tasks? What are the due dates? And how does this correlate visually so I can share my expectations as the manager to my team? So what I'm proposing here is mapping the BIM procedure, the BIM process directly on top of the normal design project schedule, and certainly milestoning for very important objectives that we're certainly looking to achieve. And here I just wanted to show graphically the way that we're thinking about BIM implementation in the two cases that we talked about previously. The implementation at a project scale. So that would be, I'm using BIM because I want my project to go and work well, or I want to implement BIM because I believe that everybody in my organization needs to fundamentally understand collaborative work sharing and data management, because we all have a role. We're all managing our processes better with respect to project delivery. So we think about BIM goals. I think that that's going to be a key element to any plan. Why? And what do I want to achieve? If I have an expectation, I certainly want to state that goal, whether it's for marketing or whether it's to communicate to my team or to my executive committee. This is why I'm about to sit down and develop a BIM plan, because it is most important for this project that we optimize the use of space within this renovation project. So that might be a goal. Certainly sustainability, commissioning, et cetera, could be other goals, but stating those clearly for all to understand is certainly going to help the objective. This is just a review on the BIM uses here. And of course, I think that the BIM goals could certainly correlate to the BIM use. Probably in any one of these bullet points, we can, more likely come up with 3 goals per use. I think in programming, for example, a goal might be to optimize, a floor to take on multiple functions and provide, better adjacency to support spaces that might be feeding into another functional space in a laboratory, for example. Whether we're innovating in design or renovating, I think that there are significant goals that could be made to support any one of these uses on the screen. In regards to BIM use analysis, I wanted to show a basic example of how a goal and a use could certainly be analyzed and narrated. I think that these narrations here in these worksheets could certainly be used for marketing, and also as well as communicating to the team the intention of this use. So we are going to do BIM to accomplish these 10 things, and here are exhibits of why. And I think even running through these worksheets will help, would help me as a project manager start to define logic around the production and creating this use, and also in regards to what it's going to take to pull it off in regards to personnel, hardware, software in a type of space, for example. And of course, help an owner understand, or a downstream function understand its value, and the reasons why behind we're going to spend the time to do this. I think the template process maps also would help, sort of analyze the use case in regards to, functionally understanding not only the value of the project, but certainly who's responsible. Is it me or somebody else I'm working with, and start to align, procedures around communication plans and the resources I would need. So we can go down the line in regards to, is my effort in BIM going to help an owner accomplish the goals for operations and maintenance? So we can go down the list in regards to maintenance scheduling, building systems analysis, record modeling, cost estimation, 3D coordination. So these are very elemental things that BIM do very well out of the box as a software, but when we start to integrate people on top of that, it certainly needs to be managed and communicated to the team. And I wanted to show a template here showing how in a lab example, certain process maps that would sort of manifest the idea around the BIM use in lab planning, and of course the information that would come out of that process. So that common information exchange at the bottom layer are the results and the outcomes of a process of that specific BIM use. We've used sheets just like this. This is very similar to the AIA level of development document for the model progression specification, also very similar to the AGC level of development form. This is going to break down the model element and assign very specific responsible parties to help manage this process. So this will help sustain and support the BIM execution process in regards to expectations about who's doing what. This is based on Uniformat, which is also authored by CSI. Each of these codes that would be hidden behind the substructures here, or the model element breakdown, would also correlate to the BIM attributes in Revit for each of the elements to be correlated. Some of those uses from Uniformat could be cost estimating or quantity takeoff, for example, under the Uniformat. But this should look very similar, to most people on the call, and also certainly have a use within the Revit environment in regards to the way those model elements are broken down. So I think we can start to pick apart between architect, contractor, civil engineer, facility manager, and others their responsibilities within the BIM project. In regards to categories, I think when we start to break down the project reference, the goals, design process, delivery strategy, and BIM scope definitions, certainly have exhibits of those industry foundations or groups that have sat down and helped us in understanding how to execute projects. So the AIA BIM protocol exhibits, Autodesk, the consensus docs, and USACE BIM roadmaps. These are all intended to help drive BIM at the very core of each of those foundations, including the ones I added as references at the beginning of the presentation. All have very similar things in common in regards to interoperability and steps that we take in managing our projects. Now, as we go through in our master planning for BIM execution, we certainly want to be cognizant of where where our information is coming from in regards to our management style, or which organization we're going to model or use as a model in our BIM execution plan. So this is just a checklist for those categories. In regards to BIM use analysis worksheets, these are just examples of worksheets that are available in regards to identifying goals associated with those, and also the BIM use analysis worksheets as well. So when we think about planning, designing, construction, operating, very, very specific items below each one of them in regards to the BIM use. So then we can start to map the roles and responsibilities matrices below these ideas. And here's just another BIM use example for a workflow flow chart to help a team understand what the management process looked like when we sat down to understand what we were doing, where we were starting, where we were ending, in every workflow in between in regards to responsible parties and the expected outcomes for our information. So I know we've talked a lot about concepts and styles of BIM execution planning. I would suspect, from my standpoint, at our clients and what I know, what we found in our research, 70% of BIM projects that we're seeing today are using a BIM execution plan, and I think that's great news. I would certainly like to see that grow as project managers now are in the mix of BIM, certainly looking at BIM projects, trying to find the correct tools to help participate in the process and understand what is being input. How do I understand the reliability of the data and information in these models before we deliver, and certainly start to untangle the idea of level of development. So the AGC and old colleagues of mine at HOK had come up with this idea, and I love this. So when we think about LOD not being tied to a phase, so I think for a few years there was a belief that LOD 100 somehow meant schematic design, 200 meant design development, 300 meant CDs, and so on. I think a better way to understand this notion is at a level 100 model, I have floors, walls, which means I have a room object, so I can estimate at a gross level a cost based on square footage. With 200, I'm starting to add elements, which gives me the ability to specify something, whether it's a floor, wall, or a part of the building. By the time I get to a level 300, I have enough information to buy it, whether that comes from pre-construction, construction, there's enough information in there for me to buy the thing out. 400, certainly now we can build it, we can install it. 500, we can commission and operate it. I think I like this better as an idea, and just makes sense when I've got to manage this process and understand what's in my model and what information do I have in that model to help sustain any one of these 5 rows. So when we think about project management tools and what they mean to me, how do I grow from my lonely BIM in my world as a project manager on my project to how do I now understand what my contractor's doing? How do I understand what my consultant has done? How do I understand what my team is doing today in regards to the common information? When I'm thinking about validating a target within the scope, schedule, and the value on that project consistently. So I think I would need a data management specification. What is the data that we're holding, and what is that spec? And how do I distribute that spec to my entire team so that I know that everybody's speaking the same language? How do I start developing my BIM project execution planning? And do I have the tools and templates to support everything in that planning structure regarding COBie, OmniClass, and the BIM tools? In regards to the templates, I think that distributing that information across the team is going to be key, because now we have everybody working off a common starting point. And if I'm going to distribute it, certainly how do I manage it in regards to the BIM content that I'm sharing, the project templates, and the information. So this diagram at its lower level, I'm instigating here that each organization will have a project manager that is working towards a common goal, that is sharing common information. That information is in the center. Above, in the blue dot, I have a cloud, hypothetically, but that is where I will coordinate my work. So there are two structures here. One is I am now able to manage my data, and then now I'm able to participate and share my BIM information with the team. Did want to talk a little bit about hardware acceleration. I know that Revit Server, Panzura, and other products are speeding the time in which we can open central files across the world, let alone the continent. It has been probably the most helpful way to keep a team intact, sharing and authoring the Revit models. So we are seeing a significant increase in over the WAN, in project teams, sharing data, seeing immediately what's been changed as if these teams were co-located within a space. So I think extending that information across the board has helped, and I suspect that we will see more and more improvements as this moves into the cloud. I mentioned two software packages, one Revit Server, which is designed to work with Revit out of the box for all flavors of Revit, including MEP and structural, and Panzura, which is very similar cloud-based technologies as well. So it's certainly a server-based work-sharing system that does allow information to propagate across the internet, and it is a foundation for work sharing. When we think about data management, on the right-hand side, what we're being asked in our here at Applied Software a lot is, how do I share information? FTP is not working. By the time I get files, distributed to us through an FTP site, it's already been updated or is now out of date. So certainly connecting this information to an owner, to multiple PMs across multiple firm types on the same project is going to be key. And then also model coordination in the cloud so that I can view, as a project manager, my project on my iPad, find information on my smartphone, and certainly understand where my team is right now. So I'm thinking about two layers here, two structures. Autodesk 360 Glue, to me, if I had that when I was using BIM early, would have been very helpful for me to understand issues around coordination within the disciplines that I was working with. So I could see at a moment's notice that there were coordination problems between architectural and mechanical and structural, and certainly assign responsibilities and duties to a team to help them fix the problems. So that would have been very key. But we have that now, and I think that's something we're going to be talking about here in just a second. In regards to data management, AEC, Vault Professional, and Buzzsaw are two other tools that can certainly help manage data, control, and distribute information across the project teams as well. So integration, Vault integrates with Autodesk software, SharePoint, certainly allows for multi-site scalability for larger groups, and connects to the cloud and offers secure data control and access. And I think what I like about this the most is the idea of capturing history and milestones, so we can start to understand the events that happened on a project and being able to record all that. I think standard content for the entire project team would be key. We do hear a lot that BIM content from our BIM managers that we work with is all over the place and needs to be controlled Vault certainly can't manage Revit families and distribute them when they're vetted and fixed out to the team and keep those contents up to date. So Vault can easily create, organize, and share project information, enable collaborative workflows, manage all the project data, and certainly integrates with other software such as Microsoft Office and Microsoft Outlook, and gives secure access for the team members. In regards to model coordination, 360 Glue, I think we're finding to be key software for our clients from AEC and construction. And I just wanted to walk you through a typical coordination process in the traditional environment today using FTP and uploads. So what we have is design, structural MEP, and a BIM manager on a Monday, kind of working and sharing files through an FTP, and they're uploaded. These are usually split out, recoordinated within the application, and messages are sent to the designer and the MEP consultant that there is a problem. Let's get those things fixed. If that happens, it is sent back to the BIM manager. For him to distribute separate emails, separate notifications, and separate issues to the design team. In our opinion, this has worked in the past. It worked fairly well to keep teams coordinated. But what we're talking about now is leveraging in the cloud for the project manager instant communication around model coordination and issue management. So because everybody's tied together, and because we're all sharing this information in the cloud, everybody, including designer, the BIM manager team, the structural engineer, are made aware of their issues. If there are problems found, certainly the project manager could be made aware of the weekly schedule, who's doing what, and have better information at his fingertips throughout the process, so that by the time Friday comes, issues are solved, and we now have a more coordinated model, hypothetically. I think a few things that Glue does for us is support. It does support multiple design applications and formats. It helps simplifies workflows. It does drive adoption to promote efficiency through the notification process and awareness about the BIM modeling process, and does connect BIM data to project systems. So you could, from Revit, go directly to the cloud by the click of a button, and go vice versa, and have information in the project manager's hands in regards to issue management and items that have been solved. So this is what a typical dashboard might look like for a project manager in regards to what Glue looks like. It does give you the 3D visualization, information about the graphics and the information within the model, and the dashboard does provide you to view the model, ask questions, interrogate, mark up, and send your inquiry to the design team for the project manager to receive information back about the question and keep everybody up to date. And how do we get that? I think it's going to be very similar, things that we're very comfortable with in regards to email. So a hyperlink is what the recipient would get about the question. If they were to click on the hyperlink, they'd be brought to a web-based user interface to that viewpoint directly. It might be a cloud or a question directly on the screen overlaying on top of the BIM model to help clearly demonstrate what the question was and what the issues were in regards to the coordination. I think 360 Glue does accept up to 80 or 90 file types, so it will accept most flavors of BIM, DWG, Autodesk products, including Graphisoft and Bentley. Does resolve clashes very quickly, so BIM coordination could be occurring in design. As we're creating the information, certainly made aware of the problems and how the collaborative team are mending those issues. So in regards to organizational project execution planning, we did spend a lot of time talking about fundamentals behind thinking about BIM, what the industry has done to help us in support for interoperability, the software, the hardware, personnel styles, the migration of cloud computing into the firm space, etc. Thinking about projects as a unique one-off, but all in regards to the planning aspects, but also the organization that's involved in making this process work, including the executive management, the project manager, project architect, down to administrators, everybody involved in this process. The idea of model coordination and issue management to help drive the projects, data management, collaboration, and hardware acceleration. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. I know we're coming up on 3:30 now. I wanted to take a break here and see if there were any additional questions.
Thank you, Michael, for this brilliant presentation. And now let's go on to answer some of the questions that were raised during the presentation. Some of the questions that are non-content related has already been answered. So let's start with the first one. This one is brought up by Barry Bloom. I think this one is specifically related to a slide, though. Comment elements that improve ROI. Large returns accrue in converting transfer of asset parameters from model to facilities management, but not mentioned on table. Please comment. Might have been one of the tables that showed up at the very beginning.
Yeah, Barry, that's a great question. When we consult with an owner like you, we do have to understand and develop a unique table for your asset management control. Some of our clients have stated that they will maintain items that need lubrication only, for example, as a preventative maintenance objective for an asset, while others want to track things that have a dollar value of $1,000 or more. So those might be two very distinct classifications for what is considered an asset. Once that is derived, certainly reverse engineering the process and understanding how to collect information of that asset could be achieved with the processes we talked about today.
Moving on, and the next question is, how does 360 and GLUE help PMs, project managers?
I think that 360 GLUE would help you participate in the BIM process without actually using Revit. I made that comment earlier in the presentation, but I think as your team is working in Revit, which is a very heavy software, in fact, it's quite cumbersome if all you want to do is view. If your interest in the BIM process is to view where the state of the model progress is happening, you'll certainly be given the opportunity to navigate, walk through, and understand the design intention. Selecting on objects within the BIM model would certainly give you information about the process. If you, as a project manager, had a few hours in the afternoon and you wanted to compare the instances of architectural elements and compare them to structural and MAP to understand if there were any overlapping geometry, you could then start to coordinate the disciplines to make sure that there are no clashes in the model. I've just given you a couple of a couple of use cases. One would be to visualize, and the other one would be to ensure that geometry is good and things are fitting properly.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And as of right now, we don't see, okay, one more question, follow up to the 360 glue question. Who pays for glue?
Who pays for glue? I think the firm that would be getting the most benefit of that product would probably pay for glue. So as a project manager, if I needed as an organization, if I needed all my project managers to be on board with the BIM process, I think we would invest for the project management team or committee to have that tool available. There may be some cases where licenses of glue could be provided to a general contractor or your client as a value add in your deliverable.
Okay, and another follow-up is, how is glue different from Navis?
Okay. I think Navisworks, I'll put it this way, in our Georgia Tech requirement, we stipulated that during design, we would want the design team to provide interference checking, meaning that in due diligence we have provided model coordination on the construction side. We wanted the contractor to provide clash detection. We didn't want to cause confusion across the two terms, but I think glue provides very good interference checking, meaning that I'm going to coordinate my disciplines and understand visually what's happening, versus using Navisworks, which would be an extremely complex piece of software that does do clash detection, does do model coordination, but it does some things that may be out of the realm of project management.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Michael. And before we close here, let's move on to the last slide. And I'm just going to tell you guys a little bit more about overall what's coming up. And please look for an email from us very soon with a link to the recorded version of this webinar for future reference, or if you want to share it with your colleagues. And during the webinar, some LiveLab learners proposed that some of the charts looked interesting, and if you would just shoot us an email at info@academiccorp.com, we'll try to our best to share that information with you. And for upcoming events, please check and stay tuned. Look at that website, livelablearning.com events/events. Okay, and related to today's topics, there are 3 upcoming webinars we're planning on getting into place. The first one is model coordination and issue management. Another one is data management and collaboration, and the third one is hardware acceleration. And please, if you're interested, definitely shoot us an email, and we'll try to get the registration links to you in the future. And lastly, for those of you guys that are not so familiar with applied software, we're a premier national professional services firm that provide construction, architecture, engineering, and manufacturing design strategies that help companies optimize their processes and workflow for designing and building better construction projects, factories, and manufacturing products. For more information on applied software, please visit www.asti.com. That is asti.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to having you for later webinars and classes. Thank you.